Hey, Tolerators, this is Natalie, and before we get to the meat of the episode, I had some quick announcements to all the men I've tolerated before. First, we have our fall merch available in our merchandise store, so make sure that you get yourself to the link in the show notes to check out our tarot-inspired and spooky-inspired anti-misogyny merch. Our Patreon is currently running a 7-day free trial on all tiers. So if you join the Patreon now, your first week is free and you could binge all of our bonus episodes where we get to have a deep dive into the friendship I have with some of our most beloved guests. We are also having a monthly newsletter and a bi-weekly blog post, and that information can also be found at the link in our show notes. Please make sure to check out all of these changes and also follow us on Instagram at Men I've Tolerated Pod or TikTok at NatalieK124 so you can see all of these changes happening in real time. Enjoy the episode. Tolerators, this is To All the Men I've Tolerated Before with Natalie Katona, your weekly look at everyday misogyny. My guest today is Erica Smith. Erica is a sex educator and the creator of the Purity Culture Dropout program. She is here today to talk about how purity culture plays a role in the quality of sex education and how purity culture is a huge tool and effective tool of misogyny. Welcome to the team, Erica.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm definitely a tolerator.
Thank you so much. Whoever is doing the fight against good old misogyny just needs to go ahead and hit me up already.
Yeah.
It almost feels like we're too far in between, but maybe there are more of us and I'm just pessimistic at this point as I walk through America.
Well, hopefully, there are some of us, there are many of us, and I hope more people make their way to you and your podcast.
Thank you. Why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of background on you and your career?
Sure. So, like you said, I'm a sex educator, and that has been what I've done my entire career, which makes it something I've been doing for 23 years now. I started doing sex education activism when I was in college, and my friends and we were taking like women's studies courses. We were women's studies majors, and we were very interested in the sexuality aspect of what we were learning and talking about. And some of my earliest sex ed work was like putting on festivals that had to do with sex education at Penn State in like 99, 2000, 2001, and having people lose their shit because they were so uncomfortable with it. It ended up on the national news before. We were being talked about on Fox News. Luckily, this was like way before social media. But that was like my early start into sex ed. And in the years since, I've worked in abortion care. I have the longest part of my career, I worked doing sex ed and HIV prevention with young people in detention in Philadelphia, mostly queer youth and young women who were locked up. I also work with trans youth and their families. And for the last 4 years, I have focused on adults who were raised in purity culture. So adults that were raised in high control religions, which ranges to everything from I signed a purity pledge at my church to I was like actually raised in a cult type things. So yeah, I've kind of built a decent following related to my purity culture work. And that is most of what I do these days.
I think when it comes to purity culture, a lot of my friends don't really understand how often we're confronted with purity culture, but that's just our everyday life. Because I was thinking about your earlier career with the festivals and Fox News picking it up. And when I was in college, we very much had, I was part of like, I went to a Catholic college and I was very part of the quote unquote like women's league or whatever in our college. But the only sexual care we had was like anti violence care. So, like, making sure that women had someone to walk with back to their dorms, or that people were aware of what you would feel like should your drink be drugged or things like that. And people are so comfortable with talking about sexual violence in compared to just like sexual awareness and a sexual lifestyle that it boggles my mind.
Well, that's exactly why we started doing these events, because we were like, well, as a feminist group, we're known for talking about assault. We're known for, calling out, and I was at Penn State University, which at the time was concealing one of the most like legendary pedophiles of all time. So while people were upset about us, like a bunch of young students talking about orgasms and clitorises and all that stuff, they were hiding a much bigger secret. But yeah, the reason we started talking about it is because we were like, oh, female activists, we have a reputation as focusing on the bad stuff about sex, but we also want to talk about the fun stuff. We don't just want to talk about HIV. We don't just want to talk about assault. We want to talk about coming. We want to talk about toys. We want to talk about fun and pleasure and porn. And yeah, there are a lot of people who were not ready for that then and are absolutely still not ready for it 20 years later.
I mean, and when I think about it, there's such an overwhelming amount of repression when it comes to the American sexuality, which I think has just like swung into a completely conservative realm that it might not have been in, say, the 70s and 80s. But all of a sudden, as a child, like, sex was just more of like an after school special discussion where it's like, oh, Barbara had sex and now she will be a teen mom
Yeah.
and she will not go to college and she will work at the mall for the rest of her life. Or, my God, she may go get an abortion and now no one is her friend in her ninth grade class. And it's always very Degrassi style, like, you will have sex, you will get gonorrhea, you will die.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, our country was founded, aka like white European settlers came to this land and they put their own values on the folks that had already been living here. So I talk about this all the time when I do like presentations about purity culture, but when those like white religious settlers came over here, they were shocked and repulsed by how indigenous people had very different sexual values and sexual behaviors and sexual practices, and they decided that that wasn't going to do. And I mean, when we use the term puritanical, Americans are very puritanical, like that's what we're talking about. They put their very specific ideas about uh nuclear families and monogamy and uh keeping pure for women and all of that shit. They brought that with them and it's baked into the fabric of this country. So even if you weren't raised going to a church where you learned that you were a terrible slut if you kissed a boy, you're still getting that message from media. You're still getting that message from pop culture. Like it's everywhere.
Yeah, there was a very overhanging theme of, well, you wouldn't want to get a reputation now, would you? You wouldn't want to be the girl who dated every guy in her class, or you knew the girls who were dating around or sleeping around, or even not sleeping around, but men have said that they got to sleep with her or whatever. And it all feels very like Plainsville, Pleasantville, USA. Like it should have stopped right around the time that Mad Men ended. But instead, we're just holding on to it. And now there's this whole weird movement where it's like the 50s were so great for women. They got to have booze and pills and they never had to work. And
we took booze and pills because we were miserable, dare I say. I mean,
yeah,
not that I was there, but you know what I mean? Like, yeah, the way that there was a sexual revolution for some in the 1970s And, it's all very interesting historically because then not long after that, we were faced with the AIDS crisis and then people responding to the AIDS crisis. And wherever we've ended up today is this, to me, very terrifying denial of sexuality as a part of our everyday lives. The way that they're banning books, sex educators are being called groomers and pedophiles. And this was the language being used against queer people in the 70s, and they've like brought it back. And it's honestly, when I started doing this work as like a young woman, I would not have envisioned that when I was in my 40s, the landscape would be what it is like today. I would not have predicted that.
I don't think anyone predicted this. Even my mother, whose stance on abortion was always, it's not for me, but who's to say it wouldn't be for you or make sense for you or whatever. I don't think that the people who had kind of just like the middle road kind of stance on like, are we teaching kids about sex? Are we teaching kids about queer sex, about options when it comes to sexuality or whatnot, would immediately jump to the year of 2023. And it's like, well, if you even use a child's correct pronouns, you yourself are a predator.
Yeah. It's, you know, I know I didn't see it coming, but what I have learned from the people I work with who were raised in a very conservative religious environment is that a lot of them were like, oh no, this was the plan all along. This was the long game. And I am able to understand that now as an outsider who was not raised in that world. But did you happen to watch the documentary called Shiny Happy People? It's about the Duggar family and the religious cult they're in.
So I have not watched it yet because I have like a list. I need to watch the Duggar documentary. And
Oh, I have a list too.
I grew up in the Duggar era
Okay.
where we were like watching her have her 21st baby and all of
Yeah.
it. So I know of the Duggars. I want to watch that one, and then I want to watch the seasons of Sister Wives where it all starts to click for them and fall apart. Like their kids get really like old enough to leave the house, and all of a sudden they're like, we don't need Cody. And I don't think these women are our friend.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
I've never watched Sister Wives, so I'm not familiar. But the reason I brought up the Duggar documentary is because they go into detail about the systems and the figures and the forces that have been essentially prepping young people to enter politics, to enter different stratuses of society so that they can be like the good Christian foot soldiers who end up working for judges or being judges. Like this is starting to bear fruit. That sounds very biblical of me to say, but like all that effort that was put into like creating these young Christian warriors, they're now the people that are like in government and they're doing all this shit. So that's something that I had never known as somebody who wasn't raised in that world.
Well, and so I was raised partially Catholic. And I say partially Catholic because we were Christmas, Easter Catholics.
Uh-huh.
And should grandma ask, yes, I still took communion. I was at a Catholic funeral over the weekend for my great aunt, and my cousin and I just giggled the entire time because we didn't know responses.
Oh my gosh, there's a lot of, I mean, I've been to Catholic weddings and I'm like, wow, there's so much to do, so much to say. There's kneeling. I don't know. Was there kneeling?
Yeah. Well, yes. And we chose not to because my knees are horrendous and we're lazy people. I don't know. And my aunt and I were talking late into the night because I was staying with her, and I was like, have you ever ran into like a very devout Catholic and you don't get it? Because like our form of Catholicism was just like a little spice at Christmas and then we left it for the rest of the year.
Well, that's how my family was with just Christianity in general. We weren't Catholic, but I was, baptized in a Methodist church, and we were very infrequent attendees. It was Christmas Eve, never Easter. I always say that we were casually Christian because we celebrated Christian holidays, but in the most commercial and American way possible. So, Easter for me wasn't about like resurrection. It was about a basket full of chocolate. And I feel like I am grateful that I do not have religious trauma because those are the folks I work with. And knowing that there's children being raised to be like, everyone's mortal soul is your responsibility and you're going to go to hell if you do anything out of line. I'm like, that is a terrifying, terrifying thing to put in a child's psyche.
Well, and it was a previous episode where we started dissecting Southern Baptist or Southern Christianity because my friend was a non Christian living amongst it and raising a daughter. And we just started to divulge into Catholicism. And I go, it's amazing how little I spent in a church, but I still have I grew up with very Christian, morals. Like, you will get married. That is the man that you will have babies with. You will only ever have sex with said man, and it will be a man. And pronouns and transitioning and queerness. And, it's not bad, but it's definitely for other people. Like, keep it out of our family. We're accepting, but we're not welcoming. And it shaped my adulthood. Here I am giving a lot of energy to dating men that I'm not attracted to. I don't actually find joy spending time with. And it's in the middle of the episode where I go, Elizabeth, fuck, I might have to start considering dating women. And she's like, yeah, I don't know why you wouldn't.
I love that you kind of had that realization on air, like while
Yeah.
you were recording.
Yeah. And now it's kind of become like a canon event where it's like, oh, and then Natalie realized she never enjoyed this to begin with. I got just far enough outside of like, oh, okay, no one is even expecting me to go to church for Christmas. And you just engross yourself in other communities and you realize, oh, there's a whole world that was just like shut off in my brain as an even possibility.
Yes, which, that's where the term compulsory heterosexuality comes in for me, where, you're not presented with any other option. It's like, of course you will date men, of course you will marry men. And a lot of the folks I work with are queer people who were raised in high control religions. And so many of them have this shame that they didn't understand their queerness earlier. And I'm like, you were not permitted to understand it earlier. It wasn't even presented to you as an option. So please try not to get down on yourself for not knowing you were queer till you were like 30 or 40, because it was like, it wasn't even on the radar for you.
And when it comes to sexual pleasure, my experience in the Midwest is anytime a woman would be like, oh, this is what pleasure feels like for me, or even ask for pleasure, the men that I have dated in the past are almost like repulsed by the idea that like I would be dirty enough to then
Mm.
want to dirty up their life by us both coming.
Ugh. And that's I like that is a common feeling, but it's just I'm just aghast even thinking about it and hearing about it. When I was a kid, my friend's parents gave her like a sex ed book, and I realize now that it was a Christian based one. And when we were in middle school, we were reading this book, and it said in the book, it was describing sexual intercourse. And of course, it's like a husband and a wife in bed. And it said, during intercourse, the man has an orgasm. And then it said, sometimes the wife does too. And even as a kid that was like years from being sexually active, I was like, that sounds kind of fucked up. Like, that doesn't seem right.
Yeah. And then I start to equate that to, I come from what I would assume and it's shocking it for outsiders to watch my family because we are a very intimate family. Like, we hug, we kiss, we're very like hands on in our affection and loud about it. My cousin and I were joking because she goes, have you ever realized that if you approach anyone in our family or they approach you, the byline is, oh, thank goodness you're here. You're my favorite. She goes, and
Aw.
it's everyone. You're my favorite. I go, oh, I skipped that phase and went full into our grannies and our great aunts by going, You're the most beautiful child I've ever seen. The most beautiful and the most smartest child I've ever seen. And we're that family. It's big fat Greek wedding all day, every day. When I start to hear other people's experiences and how this evasive purity culture has made basically the act of any intimacy predatory and gross and a crime, I'm like, oh, we're raising children who aren't hugged a lot. Plus, we added a pandemic on top of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something I think about too. A lot of the people I work with will straight up say that when they were young, they weren't allowed to physically touch their peers. And I know I'm talking not about a family, but just like your friend group. So I imagine if you're touchy-feely in your family, you probably were touchy-feely. I was very touchy-feely with my girlfriends as a kid. We would like have sleepovers and share the same bed and hug and all that stuff. And I hear from people all the time that they weren't even allowed to hug their friends because hugging could lead to thinking about sex. And we're talking like depriving a young person of a human need, which is physical touch, for the under the guise of this is going to keep you pure. And that's just absolutely fucking batshit to me.
And I've mentioned this before that on one side of my DNA, I have a very physically and emotionally and loud, intimate family. And then on another side of my family, I had uncles who wouldn't hug me or really talk to me a lot once I hit puberty. And it's like, oh, and it's like, and the line was, uncles don't hug. And I was like, well, I have 18 uncles who hug me over here. And they're like, no, uncles don't hug. It's weird. I'm like,
That is a bummer. And I know you're not the only family that experiences that. And some people, some adult men just become so uncomfortable with girls who, once they've reached womanhood, it's like, oh, now I don't know how to relate to you. I don't know how to look at you as an equal. I don't know how to have a conversation with you. And that is just really fucked up and unfortunate. And I think it clearly gets in the way of what could be an otherwise like a relationship.
I constantly live in this dichotomy where it's like, okay, so we're sexually repressed. We only have sex under the guise of marriage. We have very hetero families with hetero children. And then I think about all the ways that I was sexualized by a very young age.
Mm.
So, oh, is that your little boyfriend in your kindergarten class? Isn't that cute? To my friends at a barbecue, and her 3-year-old is being asked by older men, like, oh, did you come here with anybody? You got plans to be a wife at any time? And it's like, well, she's 3, icky. And they're all very good, devout Christians. To my mom telling me, go upstairs and put on a bra, someone might see you in the windows or something.
Yes. You make me think about, the same folks who are saying that people on the left who want sex education, who want gender affirming care for youth, they're like, you all are sexualizing kids, but they're the same people that will buy t-shirts for babies that say like boob man or, I could have been a blowjob. I mean, like those are really shirts that exist, and, little heartbreaker and shit like that. I'm like, that is sexualizing children. That is sexualizing children.
And then making their eventual sexuality like a joke.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Because that was another way that we were like very unaware that this was purity culture. I grew up in the 90s and the 2000s, baby. It was no homo all day, every day. A man brushed another man in the lunch line. It's no homo, dude. No homo. But like, let's high five. We've never thought about kissing the other one once.
Right, of course. We have to make that so clear.
Yeah. Gay being used as a slur. Women who were showing intimacy to other people being called lesbos or being like dared to kiss for the pleasure of the men at the party.
For sure.
And all under the guise of like, don't worry though, we're very straight and we're all not having any sex because we live in the Midwest and they won't give us condoms.
What state are you in?
I am in Ohio. I grew up in Indiana.
Okay. Well, I feel like knowing you're in Ohio, I'm from Western Pennsylvania, and we're not far, like culturally, geographically, politically. It's a very similar vibe. You were probably, eating the same type of food. Like Western PA, we have Midwestern cuisine as well. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. Like the the area you were in, like you weren't getting the sex ed that you needed or desired.
No, the sex that I was getting was criminal, and it was basically that baby doll that cries. Be like,
Oh,
don't
you
do
had a
it.
doll?
I
When I
did.
was in high school, those dolls were expensive, and I don't know if those dolls existed yet. They might have, but my school didn't have them. We had to carry around raw eggs for a couple
Mm,
weeks and pretend they were our babies. And that was supposed to teach us that we weren't ready for parenthood. But meanwhile, I grew up in my school, we had like 100 people in my graduating class. And I would say that uh, at least 10% of the young women in my graduating class had babies by graduation. And that doesn't count the guys that were fathers. So, very high teen pregnancy rate in my high school.
well, because that's a good point, too. When we talk about teen pregnancy, we never talk about those yahoos who were
No,
doing
we
the
sure don't.
impregnating.
No, and I mean, I know from working with teens for a long time that sometimes when young women are pregnant, they are pregnant to adult men. But, all that is a whole separate issue. There were definitely guys in my high school graduating class that had children, whether it was with girls in my school or girls in other schools. And yeah, they're not typically counted in the statistics.
No, but they just get to continue earning their football scholarship or whatever happened on
Yeah.
Glee. Bringing it back to the Duggars, I think one of the consequences we also need to be more aware of when it comes to purity culture is if you just truly make people believe that sex is off the table until God says it's okay, well, then you have all of these nefarious, underground, not safe for anyone sexual deviancies happening, like the Duggar kid.
Oh, oh, yeah. I mean, it's so complicated, and there's so many factors that influence like whether a person, acts in a sexually predatory way. But I don't think that the shame, silence, secrecy about sexuality in general helps it at all. We hear the same thing, obviously. You were someone that was low key Catholic. Like the Catholic Church is a prime example of that. Just hiding the abuses and the violence and the like, I don't even know how to put it, but just, all of the abuse that was happening, that is happening. It's not like we can pretend it's completely gone, but like this stuff happens so often in cultures and communities where sex is so deeply taboo. Amish folks, you are in Ohio, I'm in Pennsylvania. We both have Amish communities in our states. That is another very secretive, very insular religious community where sexual abuse runs rampant and they don't trust outsiders. So like the victims don't typically get help.
Right. And it's purposeful how those communities make you mistrust outsiders, but also don't provide you resources. So I'm thinking about the literacy rates in Amish communities. What we all saw from Breaking Amish or Escaping Amish or Amish Mafia.
Oh yeah.
I was a huge TLC fan
I
growing
remember
up.
Amish Mafia. That
Yeah,
show was wild.
wild, just wild. And they replace a well-rounded sex education with just no education. Like all of a
Mhm.
sudden you're never going to think about it, or you will just stumble into a sex relationship and just know how to handle that emotionally or physically in a way that you are well.
Mhm. I read a really good, I don't know where it was years ago, but a really good piece of investigative journalism about like a young woman who had spoken out about being assaulted in her Amish community and taken it to the outside authorities, and she was the one that was shunned by the whole community. There ended up being a trial, and the entire community was on the side of the man who was on trial for, like, literally, committing heinous sexual assaults against a young girl.
Well, the root of purity culture does come from Christianity, and Christianity blamed everything on a woman to begin with. Like
That is absolutely a good point.
we'd all still be sleeping by that waterfall if Eve had just said no to a snake and a snack.
A snake and a snack. I mean, yeah, yeah. So it's no wonder that people take that "you caused a man to sin, you caused a man to stumble" thing to such a literal interpretation and to such an extreme. And you alluded to this when you said you were told, like, you better go cover up for whatever reason. It also just makes me think of the way that school dress codes are always about girls not distracting boys, and they tend to get disproportionately enforced on, like, bigger girls and bustier girls and curvier girls, because their bodies are already sinful just by nature, and you can't cover up that kind of figure.
Right. Meanwhile, there's also, again, growing up and going to high school in the early aughts, there was no hiding my hips or my boobs in any sort of crop top, low rise jeans situation.
Oh, oh, I could go off about the fashion of the early aughts, and I do often, and the fact that some of it's back. I've seen, like, girls in those little, like, handkerchief shirts. I'm like, bro, I see your hip bones. We can't go back.
Yeah. And I mean, and the shame surrounding school dress codes, where some of them don't actually even send the girls home from school. Like there's just like t-shirt
Oh, they
moo
put
that,
some big ass thing out of their closet on you.
yeah,
Yeah.
that says something like, when I can dress appropriate, I'll dress myself for school or
I would
something.
I would oh my god. I like that is the equivalent of putting a scarlet letter on someone and marching them through the town square and everyone screaming shame. Like, that is so fucked up.
And people don't connect that. We've started to. The number of TikToks I've watched of mothers calling a school on speaker to be like, why was my kid sent home today?
I'm not that on TikTok, but that is not a corner of TikTok I knew existed, and I need to know.
Yeah, I think millennial moms are mad. We're just like infuriated all the
Yeah.
time. Number one, that I had to give up my work day to come and get you. And number two, it was because your shorts were a little bit above your knee. Like, was your lip hanging out? Like, come on.
Right, right. Does this interfere in your ability to read or write or yeah, I need to see some of those TikToks. I hear stories about not just from people in churches, but like public schools, not just
Hmm.
Catholic schools, public schools where this kind of thing is done repeatedly, and it's so often done, it's always the girls, and very often the, like, fat girls, the curvy girls, the girls who develop early, or the black and brown girls, or all of the above.
You have to be in lawn skirts and lawn pants, unless, of course, you're cheering for a sport, because then we have championships to win.
Oh, it's madness.
While you're out and doing your work, is there any, because I'm constantly trying to like connect dots to people. I love that you mentioned that that people who are deprogramming from their very Christianity places or whatever are saying, no, this was purposeful. This was their goal at the beginning. This is how they're infiltrating government and schools and things like that. I've been saying that about the American government when people just woke up one day and went, what do you mean my abortion rights are gone? That doesn't
Oh,
feel very 2023. And I'm like, no, it started
it
way before
started.
the pandemic, when all of these white dudes just sat in a room and was like, what pisses us off the most? The women, they've stopped having our babies. They're going
Mm,
to work. They're learning how to read.
mm. I mean, I this might be something that you're familiar with already, but I think one of the most damning things to learn about like the religious right is that their interest in abortion as an issue didn't start in response to Roe v. Wade. It started later in the 70s, about 6 years after Roe was passed. And it was, they wanted to build political power and they wanted to get people voting conservatively because they wanted to continue to segregate their schools. And Jimmy Carter was the president at the time, and they wanted him out. They replaced him with Reagan eventually. And the whole idea was we need to find an issue that Americans can rally behind so they'll vote conservatively. And they had a meeting and made a decision. The men involved, like you can find their names. I know one of them was Jerry Falwell. But they like very intentionally were like, we're going to get people pissed about abortion. That's going to become our pet issue. And then that will give us massive voting power to put the politicians and the judges in the positions we want them to be in. And here we are in 2023, or, last year, and Roe is wiped.
Yeah, I had heard the very basic outline of that story where it's like churches used to actually either not weigh in at all about abortion, or
Yeah,
some were
just Catholics did.
pro-abortion. Yeah.
Yeah. Even the Southern Baptists who we've mentioned, no love lost there, but the Southern Baptists, even in the 1970s up until like 76 or 78, they were talking about abortion at their national convention and saying that it's something that should be protected and that it's something that can be a legitimate choice in if the mother is in danger. And they included for like mental and emotional reasons. It wasn't just like if you're going to literally die if you have a baby. It was like their policy, the Southern Baptist Convention's policy on abortion. It's written, like there are receipts, like it's just so vastly changed since then. They used to think that Catholics were weirdos for being so involved, and they were like, oh, that's a Catholic thing.
That's a very intense Catholic thing, and them and their pope.
Yeah. Even like the Democrats in New England were more conservative on abortion. So we're talking about, the old Irish Catholic families, like the Kennedys and stuff. Like that's where the people were voting. Like that's where they were most concerned about abortion. And if you look at a map now, who's concerned about abortion and where the abortion laws are most restrictive are in, like the South and the Southeast.
And I think one of the hardest things about me in church currently, not that I go and not that I practice, I have crystals somewhere on this desk, but when I am talking to someone who still makes that a part of their life, part of me is like, okay, but I've been to therapy and it all feels like indoctrination and gaslighting. Like I get very nervous when I'm there because they're telling you like, and should you do this in an exact way that a white man has said, you too will get to sit on a cloud one day. And that feels like love bombing. Or purity balls. Like, we're going to get you in a really pretty dress. Daddy's going to buy you a ring.
Oh my gosh.
You may or may not feel like you married daddy tonight, but that's what we're doing. Like that, the way that my friend used to she used to allow her mother to come and pick up her kids and take them to the church rave because there'd be a DJ and a bounce house and all of it. And I'm like, but we know where the weirdos are and it's not your mom's church. And she's like, I know, but they love the rave.
Yeah, churches know how to recruit young people with events like that. The church rave. I always hear people talking about like lock-ins where you just like sleep in the church gym all night or whatever.
Yeah, that can't be anything but safe.
No.
Church camp. I love the movie Saved and how it like satirizes how church acts when it comes to pregnancy and all of it and how fanatical it'll be, and then they don't know what to do with you after you've sinned.
Oh my gosh, totally. Did you see the movie Yes, God, Yes?
No, I haven't even heard of that one.
Holy shit. I feel like if I could make one suggestion, it is to watch this movie as fast as you possibly can. It came out a couple years ago, and it stars the girl that played Nancy on Stranger Things. She's the main character, and it's it's called Yes God Yes, and it's about a bunch of teenagers at a Catholic church camp, and everyone's very horny and everyone's very hypocritical. It's a really good movie, and it has a beautiful message at the end. Fantastic. You should definitely check it out.
Well, and I think that's something that really does us a disservice to being raised in a country that was founded. I love to remind people of this, how it all clicked for me. I was watching Something Rotten, which is a musical about William Shakespeare, and you saw the pilgrims go, ew, and then like flee for the Americas. And it hit me. I was like, oh, we're the motherfuckers who fled the Renaissance. That is who raised us. They were like, it's getting a little too loosey-goosey and fun over here. We gotta go to a new rock.
We want to go to a new rock and like sleep on hard boards and deny ourselves literally any pleasure in life, which is
Right.
one of the reasons that The Witch is one of my favorite horror movies.
Mm-hmm.
Would thou like to live deliciously? I'm like, yes, I
Yeah.
would.
Meanwhile, while we're coming up with ways to have sex without having sex, like just like soaking, like if we don't move, it's not sex.
That's I really thought that that was a myth, but it's not, because I've definitely talked to and worked with folks who have done or have, have participated in variations of moving the goalpost for what makes sex actual sex. And for some people, I mean, we've always heard about the loopholes, the oral sex and anal sex are God's loopholes, all that. But like, there are actually folks who will do insertive P and V and consider it not sex if like the guy doesn't come,
Right.
if he doesn't finish.
If we just lay here, it's
Yeah.
fine. And I think that's the biggest disservice. And it's what we do with men and anger. You never taught us what to do with all of our horny feelings. And now we're just doing really weird and odd shit.
It's so much to wrap my brain around sometimes that I'm like, everyone would feel so much better if sex hadn't been taught to you as the literal worst thing you can do other than murder. And that's
Right.
something that, my ex-Mormon clients will tell me, like, oh, I was raised to believe that sex was the same level of sin as murder.
So was drinking caffeine.
Right. Like,
Because
it's
caffeine's a drug.
it's my favorite. There's a Diet Coke waiting for me in my fridge right now.
When you're combating purity culture and you're trying to breed the future of sex education, what does that work entail specifically?
First of all, it entails like taking a good hard look at the values that a person was raised with and deciding, like, what am I going to keep, what am I going to throw out, and what am I going to replace all this stuff with? Because a lot of folks they'll come to me and they'll be like, well, I don't know what I believe anymore. I know that I don't believe that I'm going to die if I have sex. I know I don't believe that being gay is a sin, but I don't know what I believe now, and I don't know how to like live those beliefs. So there's a lot of work on examining that stuff and giving yourself permission to have a new set of sexual ethics that's not dictated by your church or by a Bible. I definitely do a lot of work with that, like just giving people almost like the permission to create their own set of values, and then helping them figure out how they can live by those values. And for a lot of people, it ends up being pretty simple. Like, yeah, I believe that consenting adults should be able to make their own decisions as long as they're not hurting anyone, and people can have the kind of sex they want, even if it's not my thing. And so after the values comes adding in the correct information. Like, you got to get the basic information about your body, get the information about communication. So much of sex education is about normalizing this. Everything is The range of normal in human sexual behavior is so broad, and most people just want to know that like they're not weird, and most of them aren't. It's like That's a perfectly normal fantasy. It's not weird that you think this. It's not weird that you masturbate by humping a pillow. Like there's so many things that are normal. And yeah, so I my philosophy on sex education in general is I want to give people all the information and then allow them to make their own decisions about it. And I operate that way whether I'm talking to a 15-year-old or whether I'm talking to a 50-year-old. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. I'm not going to give you my opinions on your personal sexual behavior unless you ask me. I just want to create a space in which you can make decisions that feel fully empowered and make decisions that are based on like being informed.
And then when it comes to us people who aren't sex educators, how are we making sure that we are still providing a country, an environment, a school system that promotes healthy sex education? I'm thinking about my uncle trying to make a joke and it did not land. And I was starting to panic. And then finally he told me he was being sarcastic. But we just had vote Ohio no on situation 1 because it was going to be a very sneaky way where they wrote it to where it's like, well, clearly, if 60% of your state's population doesn't believe in this, we should then have the white men in the fancy room just vote and have them make the call. But it was written in a way where, like, even I second guessed myself walking up and actually reading it. I was like,
oh, yeah.
Oh, no, fuck. Now I don't actually know what's keeping abortion on the ballot.
Yes.
Because I had signed all of these documents. I had made sure that this was like calling people being like, yes, this is what I want. And then I walk up and I'm like, oh no, now I don't actually know. And my uncle had said, hey, Natalie, I heard Ohio went the wrong direction on that abortion law. And I immediately like broke out into a cold sweat. And I was like, no, I understood it that we did it right because we voted no. Ohio, no, it right. Because now I'm worried I voted wrong. And finally he goes, Natalie, I'm joking. I'm being sarcastic. I meant for the abortion haters. It went wrong for the white men in the room. And I'm like, oh, okay. So educating ourselves in how they try to undermine sex ed and how they try to take choices like that away from us.
It's so like, I mean, the word evil comes to my mind. It's sly, it's manipulative, it's language manipulation and tricks. And it's hard to keep up with. It truly is. I rely on in Pennsylvania, we have the Women's Law Project, and I get a lot of my information from them. But if you're in other states, like there's going to be a project similar in your state. So I would also say the Planned Parenthood Action Fund, like the, political arm of Planned Parenthood, and any abortion, like the National Abortion Federation, they are going to be keeping tabs on what's going on in your particular state so they can explain the nuances of that shit, because it is often, like you said, written in a way or done in a way that makes you second guess, and that's intentional.
And I mean, I'm living currently in a reality where I'm so close to Tennessee. They've all but made drag queens illegal to even live there. Dayton is, I think we're just small enough to where like no one actually cares what we do. But in Columbus, we have white supremacist groups showing up to drag brunches and chanting and making it unsafe for people to go. I was trying to explain to my dad, we were at a gaming convention and someone was making fun of the fact that on our game badge that it serves as like your ticket for the weekend, you could get a ribbon that said, ask me about my pronouns. And I said, oh, I just changed my pronouns so that they printed it on my badge so I didn't have to get a ribbon every day. And he said something like, well, why would you have to do that? And he got like snotty with me. I think he was trying to show off for his brother. And I had a meltdown. And I was like, number one, I explain this to you every year. When I make pronouns something that's just normal and safe to talk about and like we all just respect one another, people stop dying. That's all I'm trying to do, is to stop a hate crime today.
Yeah, and to do your tiny little part in making something like acknowledging and asking for pronouns seem just a commonplace thing.
Yeah. And I told him, I was like, at some point, and I don't know when it's coming, but it has to come soon. There will be something that happens to our family that makes you realize how scary our country actually is.
Mm.
Because there's just like, they're really good at gaslighting us and sweeping it under the rug and being like, we're just trying to do what God would have wanted.
It's so much. It's so
It's
much
so
that I'm
much.
like,
And then we're like, we just wanted jobs. We just wanted to graduate college and we wanted to make salaries. And
maybe
instead,
buy a house, maybe not have student loan debt forever.
maybe buy a house, maybe not have student loan debt. And we literally have to lead this very slow burn revolution where it's like, we're not taking to the streets and we're not burning down Amazon warehouses, but we're just kind of like sitting at home simmering on TikTok being so mad.
Uh-huh. Memeing. We're memeing it.
Yeah. We're just like, what do you mean you didn't change any laws based on my really good SpongeBob quip?
I mean, memes really get me through, like the
Honestly.
socialist memes out there and oh my gosh, they're just, because to me, like, humor has to be part of my everyday life. That's part of pleasure to me, is finding humor in things. And despite all of the serious shit you and I just talked about in the last like hour, like we still managed to like laugh at a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's no other way to be in my mind.
No, at all. If I'm not laughing, I'm crying. So well, and speaking of TikTok, everyone was on board for like America taking over TikTok. Oh, thank God, we'll be so safe. America's gonna get a handle on TikTok. I go, America, with Bezos and Musk and everyone suppressing sex workers, sex
Oh my God.
educators, and people of color in the queer community. Oh, sure. I can't wait for that TikTok.
No, no. Social media is such a mess. I mean, I'm still on Twitter. I'm not going to call it its supposed new name because that's just so stupid to me.
That
Like
ugly icon.
that ugly icon. But yeah, it's for creators that do work like I do. It's hard to know like what platforms. I don't feel like we could say that any of them are totally safe.
Right.
Knock on wood, I've been lucky with my account because I don't tend to post sexualized content. I post like conversations about sex,
Mm-hmm.
and that hasn't gotten me, again, I'm knocking on every wood. That hasn't gotten me flagged like folks who are posting like photos or things that tend to be more like openly erotic. But it is, yeah, the same folks that are censoring sex education in schools and all that stuff, they also go very, very hard against any kind of sexualized content online, which includes OnlyFans. And you know, that means that even platforms like Instagram are facing censorship because it's like they're applying this broad crackdown.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, it's almost like no one wants to monitor what their kids are doing online because it's got to be exhausting and there's so much online. So they're like, can't Bezos just do it and suppress people using his little magic algorithm?
Right. Or, Zuck or any of them. Like we're just gonna
Musk, I trust you. Can you make it so my kids don't see boobies? Can you just do me that solid?
Speaking of boobies, did you see the person who was kind of like Twitter's main character in the last few days was this woman who records TikToks about her husband's quote unquote porn and sex addiction. And she made a video where they were talking about how they were going to go see Oppenheimer and they knew that you could see Florence Pugh's breasts in the movie, and they had a safety plan where he would close his eyes and put his head on her shoulder anytime there were breasts in the movie. And this video has gone massively viral in the last couple days. And this is a woman who is parroting the like fundamentalist evangelical talking points about sex and porn. And it's gone so mainstream that a lot of people don't know that's where she's from and that's her background. So they're like, this lady's absolutely nuts. And it's like, this lady's learned everything she learned from evangelical Christianity.
Yeah.
And that's what that is.
And so because I haven't seen the video, but her purpose
Mm-hmm.
is to be making a joke and a mockery out of it, or is her
No,
playing?
she's dead ass serious.
She's
She's
dead
dead
ass.
ass serious. Her entire TikTok account is about you know, she's not the only one. This is a whole corner of TikTok is like women who post about their husband's issues with porn. And I put that in quotes in my mind because porn addiction is not something that's recognized as an actual diagnosis. A lot of times it's like a religious take. There's so much to be said about that. But yeah, so she's talking about her husband's battle, essentially.
Well, they should have gone and see the Barbie movie. Margot Robbie announces that they don't have genitals.
That's true. No, just blobs, just blobs under their skin or under their clothing.
The best part of the Barbie movie is like Ken reacting to the fact that like, no, I should want genitals. Those men are making fun of me.
Mhm. I know. He's like, I have all the
I have
genitals.
all of them. I have every type of genital. So
Yeah.
I haven't seen that. I know that the thing about, again, porn addiction, like you said, is like, at what point do you diagnose it? At what point have you self-diagnosed your husband with porn addiction because you're mad at him or any of it? I remember how demonized porn was in the early aughts. We were rewatching One Tree Hill for a spin-off series that we do about comfort shows, and every fight that Haley and Nathan got into was because he had either had sex with women before her, before he
Mm,
even knew who she was, or he liked internet porn.
mm-hmm. Very timely, you know, like the internet was still new enough that the proliferation of porn was
Yeah.
like, you know, a big shocking deal to everybody. But, you know, I'm not going to be long-winded here, but the thing about porn addiction is that scholarship around it is really complicated. Neuroscientists who do sex research have found that porn does not stimulate the brain in the way that other substances do for an addict. So actually calling it addiction isn't helpful or accurate. But the researcher's understanding of addiction is different from a layperson's understanding of addiction. And religious anxiety clouds a lot of this because if you're told porn is bad, it ruins your brain, it changes your brain. None of that is, I mean, it doesn't change your brain. That's not ever been demonstrated. But if you grow up with that anxiety, you're more likely to self-diagnose as having a problem with porn as opposed to if you were someone who didn't grow up hearing that it was bad.
Mm-hmm.
So the people that self-diagnose or diagnose their partners, the correlation with them being deeply religious is pretty high. So I've worked with men who previously had gone to these like for-profit Christian porn rehabs, and some of them were like, "Yeah, my wife and pastor decided I had a problem because I watched porn 4 to 5 times a year."
4 to 5 times a year.
You heard it. Yep.
Well, and then there's is it cheating? Is it not cheating? Can he still be faithful to me if he's watching Game of Pussy? And it's like, probably, because do you not go to the Iron Man movie and then think about Robert Downey Jr. on the way home? Was that just me? I don't know.
It's the porn topic is so complicated that I did an entire class on it a year ago. And I wrote a big section about it in the sexual values workbook I created, which is like how to evaluate, you know, your feelings on it and your feelings on your partner watching it. And in the porn class I taught, I go through like how to talk to your partner about it, how to evaluate what's okay in your relationship. Um, yeah, it's a big thing for people.
I think, now that I'm thinking about it, so purity culture could also be And again, it's so new that we have yet to connect it to anything else. But people are using AI, of course, to make revenge porn because why
Oh,
wouldn't you?
right.
But then they're also using it to just make porn in general or to turn it into a fetish. And it's like, oh, yeah, because if it's a robot, you have no guilt. You don't have to like settle that up with the big guy upstairs. It was a robot on your phone.
It's so interesting. I tell people all the time, like, if you want to enjoy erotic content and you feel like worried about the exploitation of performers, like read some erotica or listen to erotic stories. Like, you don't have to get an AI robot with breasts. Yeah.
Ah, well, I'm going to move us into the last part of our show. Thank you so much for this really great conversation and for all of the work that you do because I have an entire notebook with notes of just like my angry scrawling of this is how purity culture fucked
Mm.
me forever because I read the purity myth just like
Oh,
on
yeah.
a whim.
Yeah.
um at the end of the show, we like to give kind of an overhang lesson of like one thing you can take away from the episode that can make you like a better person. And then
Hmm.
we like to manifest by adding in some positive energy of what we hope happens in the near future.
So, my parable for everyone is that it is literally never too late to begin exploring your sexuality if you feel like it's been stunted by anything. If it's been stunted by abuse, assault, or purity culture, which all end up resulting in similar manifestations for people, but it's never too late. So, if you're 50 and coming out of purity culture, if you're 20 and coming out of purity culture, you have the rest of your life to create the kind of relationship with your sexuality you want. And I don't care how old you are and I don't care how behind you feel, but it is now your responsibility to do something and create the kind of relationship with sexuality that you want to have because you get to define that journey going forward.
I love that. And that was going to be mine. So I'm just going to co sign
Oh,
onto it.
awesome. Brain
You
twins.
probably put it more eloquently than I was going to. What about your manifestation? What would you like to hope for the listeners and the universe and the country going forward?
Oh, the listeners, the universe, and the country. I want us all to feel more ease with ourselves, our bodies, our desires, our pleasure, the things that we enjoy, and to feel less shame and guilt for them. To just, I'm like, let the soft animal of our body.
Let
You
the
know where I'm going.
whale, let the whale song sing.
I just want us to feel more at ease in our bodies. Yeah.
Mine is a very practical one. I wish that there was an OnlyFans type of website that, and I get maybe Patreon tries to do this, but it's OnlyFans, but it has nothing to do with like the gratification of sex or sex work. Instead, it's like, I'm a fan of women having equality
Oh,
and you're not suppressed in an algorithm anymore because it's
yeah.
not a billionaire at the
Mm-hmm.
head of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like a safe place on the internet, kind of like when the internet was brand new and just some rando made a website and all of the like-minded weirdos found the forum and spent all day on
Yeah,
it
for sure.
before we had hashtags.
Yes,
I
that's a
would lo-
lovely wish.
I would like it if people who are trying to end purity culture, fight for equality, are artists, are just people who don't piss off white male billionaires, stopped being suppressed by the algorithm so that people could find you. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, I would love that.
Because deprogramming starts with information. You don't know what
Hmm.
you don't know until you go, wait, I
Totally.
I think somehow taking communion once a year made me believe that I couldn't be gay.
It's a long, once you start pulling those threads, they all begin to unravel.
Thank you once again for coming and making the show way more informative and offering your expertise. Please let the tolerators know where they can find you.
Fellow tolerators, I'm on Instagram where that's kind of my main hub. My Instagram name is ericasmith.sex.ed. And I am also at purityculturedropout.com. And that's where you can find how to work with me.
And tolerators at Men, I almost gave my personal one. At Men I've Tolerated Pod, that is where you can go to find us wherever you find us on podcast and on the internet, because there's no shortage of us on the internet. Consider joining the Patreon, and then maybe we can make the Patreon the place where they can't suppress us. And they can't suppress us if we're wildly popular. So continue to post, comment some posts, and leave 5-star reviews. And remember, tolerators, you don't have to smile through anything you're tolerating, including a lot of shame, making your belly feel icky because you went through a very natural process and got horny. Smiles are for joy.